human beings at some time want to know what the future will look like. But, as we all know, we can't know absolutely for certain. Still, we can make educated predictions based upon the best information we can get. So with this assessment tool, you and your organization will be able to look at the big picture, the broad trends, current and emerging, that will shape your future. For one thing, you will need to learn to distinguish between three types of trends. First, there are fads, short-term trends that are over almost as soon as they start, like the public's wild interest in a style of music. Second, there are cycles, trends that come and go, like the width of men's ties that get narrower and narrower until they become wide again. And finally, there are major trends, the ones in which you should be interested, that will influence your success long term, like the use of wireless communications technology. You will be surprised at how much information is available on the general trends shaping the future in newspapers, magazines, government documents, reports from the United Nations, the World Bank, and other national and international organizations. As a general rule, look for analyses of population trends. They are the most important indication of what the future will look like. Population trend information is the starting point from which you will be able to predict the need for products and services. For example, if you know that a certain city or region of your country experienced a unique increase in births 10 years ago, you can predict that in a few years, anyone providing products and services to teenagers is going to have a windfall. You can draw some of your most important conclusions about opportunities for the future just from analyzing population trends. Question number 5. How well does your organization assess general trends? Again, give it 0 to 10 points. Now, add up the total score you've given to your organization. With a maximum of 50 points, how well did you rate its effort to synchronize itself with the outside world? Using the 5 synchronization assessment tools, you should be able to paint a complete picture of the outside environment in which your organization functions. You should also be able to assess how well you are currently doing in providing the services and products people need. Now, we're going to take a break so I can answer your questions about the first half of my presentation. Then, I'm going to talk more about synchronization, about how you synchronize the inside of your organization so that it is aligned with the outside environment. But until then, I look forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Let's begin with the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone number or fax which appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. And our first question actually is from Sinaloa, Mexico. Please go ahead, please. Sinaloa.
Bueno, muy buenos días.
Buenos días. Specifically for public schools in Mexico, what are the aspects that we should take into account to implement a synchronized organization? I'm asking this because we consider that the public or private organizations don't have the same strategies. Thank you very much.
Actually, I believe that education is education at one level. If you follow my thinking that the first thing you need to do is to look at the outside world, you are not educating people in a vacuum. So whether a school is a private school, or whether it is a public school, or whether, no matter what, you want to be educating people in terms of your mission to what is needed in the general environment. And whatever it is, there's going to be an outside component. So in today's world, you obviously, for example, want to be sure that everybody knows computers and information technologies and is conversant with that. Now, 40 or 50 years ago, you would have said that to a lesser degree. So whatever you're doing, you must take your cue from whatever outside is going to dictate your internal response.
Thank you. Our next question is also from Mexico. Mexico City, go ahead, please.
Buenos días. Good morning. We're calling from the Directorate of Industrial Information. How can I synchronize the communication between my employees? I'll repeat the question. How can I synchronize the conversation, the communication with my employees, and how can I evaluate the internal personnel? Thank you.
That's an excellent question, and that will be fully answered in the second module. You will see that. But in advance of that, because obviously something that you heard in the first part stimulated you to ask that question, and I'm glad because that's why we have two parts to this. Part of it is just the whole climate that is the whole technology world that is available to organizations today, the world that was not available just a few years ago. The first step is to network relevant information wherever possible. Typically, people in organizations hold on to information because knowledge is power that way and ensures their continuity. What you know or what I know, if I'm thinking individually, is going to keep me from getting fired or keep me from being underappreciated. So what you want to do is, wherever possible, make a core of information available to people who are decision makers. The next thing that you need to do is to value their individual responses to that information, because there's a core of knowledge and they each need to apply it differently. But the critical ingredient in today's world at the level we're talking now, before the second module, is to get all of the information you can from the outside world and to make it available to people and to get them aligned that way.
Great. Next question is from Sabinas Coahuila. Go ahead, please.
Sí, buenos días.
Buenos días.
Cuando nosotros estamos realizando
Good
nuestra
morning.
evaluación de
When
tendencias de consumo,
we're looking at our
podemos tener
consumer tendency
esas
reports,
tendencias,
we
pero ¿qué
can
tanto
see these
influye el
tendencies,
factor
but
económico
how much does
dentro
the
de ese
economic
análisis?
factor influence this analysis?
Well, if by that you mean, how do I determine if it's worth going after? That is, if what I hear you saying is we look at this and there's let's say there are a group of consumers who are saying one thing, you have to be in a position to say, okay, enough people, remember, these surveys have got to be surveys that you can trust. I'm not talking here about somebody gives me an offhand comment. You know, you meet somebody in an office and the person says, I think we should do this, and somebody else says, I think we should do that. You are going to be conducting surveys that are reliable, that you can trust. And with that in mind, you then are in a position to make an educated choice. The other thing is, you don't have to rush into making changes so that you throw everything in that you're now doing out to get something new. If you become a fully synchronized organization, you are doing this automatically. You are constantly adjusting and readjusting so that you are not making massive changes. If you have to go from state 1 to state 2, it proves that you're not properly synchronized because you haven't been listening. So these will not be dramatic changes. They will be evolutionary.
Great. Thank you. And our next question is from Latin American Technological University. Go ahead, please.
I would like to see if you could give us a sum of benefits, that is pros and cons, of how us as professionals can use synchronization and how we can use it in our professional world. So a summary of pros and cons of synchronization.
The pros are you're going to continue to have a job. The cons are you're going to be out of business. You see, unless you synchronize your organization with the outside world, you will do the equivalent of write with a pencil today. If there are people, and look around, even more important than my answer to that is, from where you are today, from now on, look at people, judge people, compare people based upon their willingness to accept and to explore the opportunities using technology. Now, everybody is aware of the fact that we have everything from cell phones to faxes to computers to Palm Pilots to all kinds of things that I haven't dreamed of and you haven't dreamed of. Now, if somebody says to you today, you know, I'm really not comfortable using a computer, what would you think of them? You would say to yourself, that person is not going to be functional. That person is living in the past. The payoff is you're going to have one of the greatest tools available to you. So that's the pro. And use this. Simple things that we now take for granted that would have seemed unthinkable to us a few years ago, and that now you or I couldn't have. Just think of this. I am talking to you, you are talking to me. 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that would have been considered impossible. For some people, that would still be thought impossible.
Okay, we go to Lima, Peru for our next question. Go ahead, please.
Buenos días. Quisiera preguntar,
Good morning.
¿cuál cree usted
I would
que
like to
puede
ask,
ser la principal
what do you think could be one of the premier difficulties in terms of synchronizing the needs of the clients, to synchronize the organization with the client's needs?
The people who work in your organization. As was said in the introduction, in order to become flexible, in order to look at the outside world, people have to want to change. It's in people's heads. People don't want to change. This is not easy. If this were easy, all organizations would be successful.
Thank you for your questions. Let's now move to the second module of our program.
Now that you know what it takes to synchronize an organization with the world outside of it, we can discuss the second half of the equation. How an organization synchronizes itself internally so that it is able to capitalize on opportunities in the outside world. You can have all the reliable information you can possibly gather from your 5 surveys and still fail as an organization unless people inside your organization have synchronized their actions and priorities to take advantage of them. That's what synchronization is all about. But it is crucial to remember that you must always work from the outside in. In other words, the needs of people outside your organization determine what your organization does. It's not the other way around. Picture the outside world as one big circle and the world of your organization as another circle of equal size. Ideally, the goal is to get both circles to overlap perfectly, so they are one and the same. I've made that sound easy, but it is a difficult coordination for most organizations to achieve. As I mentioned at the start of this program, most organizations, even if they begin by being highly responsive to the world outside of them, typically wind up becoming more inner-directed than outer-directed. Perhaps it's just a weakness of human beings, or of human beings working in the artificial environment of a modern organization. Whatever the reason or reasons, over time, people in even the most responsive organizations too often eventually take the outside world for granted. They stop listening to their patrons and clients. They stop analyzing changing external conditions to their organization. They think that because they've been around a long time, they just know what's best. Even worse, they become more concerned with what's going on inside their organization, the politics, for example, than what's going on outside. And sometimes, as a result, they even make the fatal mistake of choosing to do something that is politically expedient within the organization, but that is bad for its success with the outside world. For example, most organizations are slower to stop offering products and services than they probably should be. As the expression goes, for too long they throw good money after bad. They are already set up to deliver their existing products and services. They are comfortable with them. They have employees in place. They avoid making difficult decisions, like firing people or reassigning employees. So too often, they continue in unproductive activities for longer than they should, providing products and services for which there is no longer a sufficient need or market. In other words, most organizations at some point stop being synchronized with the world outside of them. It's just a fact of organizational life. So the obvious question is, how do we accomplish the all-important goal of synchronizing the inside of an organization with its outside? You may already have guessed the answer. We need to use 5 additional synchronization assessment tools. But instead of being directed at the world outside, they survey opinions and obtain data and information from people working inside it. And that includes everyone, no matter how high or how low on the administrative ladder. You want to hear from everyone, from the people who answer your phones to your chief executive. Everyone has a valuable perspective to share, especially the people who deal most closely with your clients. Now listen to this point very carefully. You must develop internal surveys that complement the external surveys we've already discussed. In other words, the questions on your internal survey need to be the same as those you asked on your external survey, but framed appropriately for someone working inside your organization. For example, on your client satisfaction survey, you might ask the question, what do you think is the major weakness in the services provided by the Women's Health Clinic? On your employee satisfaction survey, the one that complements it, the one you give to people inside your organization, you would frame the same question slightly differently. But you would be looking for information about the same subject. You might ask them, what do you think our clients believe is the major weakness in the Women's Health Clinic? I'll discuss more about the relationship between the surveys in a few minutes. But it should be obvious that they are two sides of the same coin, and that they have to be structured together for them to contribute to your synchronizing your organization. Once again, please be ready with a piece of paper and something with which to write, because I'll be asking you to answer some questions. The first internal assessment tool you need to develop is an employee client satisfaction survey. You should construct a survey that allows the people in your organization to indicate how well they think every product, service, and department is perceived by your current clients. In other words, they have to put themselves in the minds of your customers or patrons and rate your organization accordingly. Already, I'm sure that you can see where the whole process of synchronization is going. As we discussed in part 1 of today's program, first, you ask current clients how satisfied they are with your services. Second, you ask people who work in your organization how satisfied they think your clients are. The results will reveal if there is any gap. Synchronization is about finding any disconnect between the world outside of your organization and the world inside. And that is crucial information, as I'm sure you realize. So here's the first question for you to answer. How well does your organization, or one you know, assess its employees' perception of its clients' satisfaction? Rate it from 0 to as many as 10 points. The second internal assessment tool you need is an employee-client needs assessment. Usually, most people who work in an organization think they know something that current clients or patrons need that they aren't getting. They figure that they talk with enough people and that they have observed enough of what goes on for long enough so that they have a pretty good idea of what new products and services should be offered. Well, this is a chance to capture all of their potentially valuable information in a way that will allow you to compare it with what clients also think. Imagine what might happen if you discover that there is no relationship between what new services clients think they need and what people who work in your organization think they need. Think of what a disaster you might be able to avert and how important it is that this aspect of your organization is synchronized. Companies fail every day because they provide products and services for which there is no market. They even make the terrible mistake of changing products and services with which the public is perfectly content. A number of years ago, Coca-Cola made a gigantic blunder based upon a totally unjustified assumption. The company decided to change the formula of its classic flavor. With tremendous fanfare, it announced the introduction of its new and improved variety. But consumers, the drinking public, promptly rejected it. Coca-Cola had to do away with its new flavor and reintroduce its classic formula. If the company surveyed consumers and asked them if they should change their formula and how they liked the new one, it talked with the wrong consumers. Their process was terribly flawed. There was no need to change in the first place. It is as wrong to want to change for the sake of change as it is to resist change. By contrast, synchronization allows you to make the most appropriate and needed changes. You've probably guessed what question number 2 is. How well does your organization assess its employees' perception of current clients' needs? Give it a score from 0 to 10, as usual. The third internal assessment tool you need to develop is an employee population needs assessment. It complements the population needs assessment we've already discussed. When you conduct your employee population needs assessment, you will ask people within your organization what they think may be the needs of potential clients. They will have a lot of first-hand anecdotal knowledge. They may routinely talk with colleagues in other organizations or do their own outside research. Conducting these two surveys will allow you to check one set of information against another. So question number 3 is, how well does your organization survey employees' knowledge of general population needs for your products or services? Give it a score from 0 to 10, as before. The fourth internal assessment tool you need to develop is an employee competition assessment. In this survey, you will ask your current employees what organizations they believe compete with yours, how well they think they fulfill their mission, and where new opportunities in the marketplace may be for your organization. Question number 4. How well does your organization survey current employees to determine the needs of people who are not now your clients for your products and services? Score this from 0 to 10. The fifth and final internal assessment tool that you need is an employee trends assessment. It complements the trends assessment we've already discussed. Many people who work in organizations are aware of trends in the outside world that can make or break your success. Too often, employees are not asked their opinions and for information they may have. Your organization's future may depend upon something as simple as routinely surveying your employees for their assessment of important trends. Question number 5. How well does your organization survey current employees to determine the trends they think will affect your organization's future? Rate it 0 to 10. Take a minute to total your organization's score on these 5 questions. How well did it do? Can you see where the most obvious gaps are? Are you pleased or disappointed with the results? Compare your organization's score on these 5 questions with its score on the first set of 5. Was it better, worse, the same? Specifically, compare the scores on the internal and external surveys that complement each other. For example, the client needs assessment with the employee client needs assessment. Let's assume that sometime in the near future, you and your organization have completed both sets of surveys for real. The ones that deal with the outside environment from your current clients and from independent research, as well as those that deal with the perceptions about the outside environment from people who work within your organization. You now have an opportunity that most organizations are not even aware of, let alone in a position to benefit from. You now have the basic benchmarks from which you can synchronize the inside and outside of your organization. In other words, once you have both sets of surveys, you need to focus on the gap or gaps between the results from each survey. Where they overlap exactly, you can congratulate yourself as well as everyone else in your organization. Where they don't, you can see precisely how you need to fine-tune your organization so that it becomes more effective, even more financially viable. In other words, you will have the basis for synchronizing your organization, and you'll be able to see it right before your eyes and even show it to others. Most important, eventually, you will even be able to quantify the value added as a result of your successful efforts at synchronization. For example, suppose your client needs assessment reveals that your clients overwhelmingly say they need a certain service. But in your employee client needs assessment, that service was not listed as a priority by members of your organization. Suppose you eventually decide that it makes sense to offer such a service after assessing any number of factors. And suppose also that such a service brings needed revenue to your organization. Those dollars can be credited directly to your synchronization efforts. Here's another example. Suppose that on your client satisfaction survey, people expressed dissatisfaction with a certain service, and suppose that on your employee client satisfaction survey, people inside your organization reveal that they were not aware of such discontent. Based upon client reaction, you may decide that such a service is altogether unnecessary. So the money you save by discontinuing it is value added to your organization. You now have the basic tools for synchronizing any organization. But of course, synchronizing an organization takes much more than conducting surveys. To begin with, there has to be an organizational culture that welcomes new ideas and new information. People have to be willing to change in light of new facts they learn. They have to want to create strategies for implementing change based upon your survey results. People have to be willing to proceed from the assumption that they can never know